Ooh, that was just a wave of the hand.
Just like that. Snap your fingers.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We call this meeting of the Governance Committee to order, August 7th, 2023. I'm going to start with a roll call. Councillor Tabor.
Here.
Councillor Lombardi.
Here.
And I'm Councillor Cook, and I am here. Did everyone have an opportunity to look at the draft minutes from the June 26th and July 31st meetings?
Yes.
I did, and I thought one change might be in order
Okay.
in the later meeting.
This is the June 31st.
We were talking about brick sidewalks, and the minutes say I requested an account of the bricks remaining. And
Yes.
poor Peter Rice has to go count all the bricks.
Yes.
What I meant was how many sidewalks outside the historic district,
Thank you.
how many are left with brick outside the historic district? Blocks of sidewalk. Let's say blocks. That's what
Okay. So can I get, if there are no other changes, a motion to adopt the minutes from, let's do them separately, June 26th.
So
Yes,
moved.
so moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And motion to adopt the minutes from July 31st with an amendment.
May I interrupt for 1 second?
Yes.
Oh, do we have somebody keeping the minutes, taking, made those motions, et cetera? or-
No, I thought there would be somebody up in legal doing that. Do we know if there is somebody?
I'll do it, I'll do it. But I wasn't doing it a minute ago.
Or is
so-
somebody transcribing working from the recordings?
That might be the case. That's what we had happen last time, I
Is that-
think.
is that- All right. Well, we can always do that anyway, even if there isn't somebody planning on it, we can find somebody to do it. Okay.
Okay. So a motion to adopt the minutes from July 31st, 2023, with amendment on page 2, section 5A. Councillor Tabor requested an account of the blocks of bricks remaining to be available at the next meeting.
Yeah.
Is that, okay? Would somebody be willing to make that motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay,
So we don't have to count bricks.
okay.
Yeah.
So the minutes are adopted. The next item on our agenda is old business. And today we actually have someone here from the Historic District Commission, Dave Adams, on sidewalk policy. So I would love to entertain a motion to suspend the rules and bring the sidewalk policy up first so that we don't take up his whole morning.
I'd move that we suspend the rules and bring up that discussion.
Is there
Second.
Right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So we will start instead with the sidewalk policy. I would like to invite Dave Adams to come up to the table with us. And I will, for everyone at home, I'm going to scroll back to that in the packet so you can see exactly what we're talking about. And I will refresh everyone's memory as well that the Governance Committee is talking about the city's sidewalk policy because we had a request from the council to review it following some neighborhood requests to keep brick sidewalks that did not comply with the policy. The council last year voted to keep brick sidewalks in place in parts of State Street where they were already in place at an additional minor cost to the city. It was around $50,000, I believe, was the cost. But the council at the time asked the Governance Committee to still look again at the sidewalk policy. So at our last meeting, we had our Director of Public Works, Peter Rice, come and talk to us about the policies in DPW around sidewalks and specifically this policy and how it looks in implementation. We had invited the Historic District Commission to send a representative to come and speak to this policy as well, because much of the policy refers to the historic district. With that said, Dave Adams has joined us today.
Thank you very much. Obviously, the commission is very interested in the sidewalk policy. As you probably know, we have no direct control over sidewalks or of the paving of parking areas, but we do have some requirement to look at the site and siting of projects, and have been encouraging people over the last few years, what with the issues of permeability and pavings, to think in terms of more unit materials rather than solid castable materials, and the brick sidewalk sort of fits hand in glove with that.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Adams?
I guess my understanding of the way the brick sidewalks are made now is that there is a non-permeable base put under them, so permeability is not improved.
I was speaking of drive surfaces, not so much of the sidewalks themselves.
Okay.
So if there are brick sidewalks, do you encourage the homeowner to keep that character in their driveways? Or
Yeah, to that point, precisely, we've been seeing a number of applications where we've been steering people toward using paving, the granite pavers and that sort of unit material for their parking areas and drive areas. And to me, that fits in very well with the brick of the sidewalk. I don't think we've seen an application for someone putting actual brick in as a paving material on their site.
Okay.
Racking my brain here, I don't think I've seen that once, but we've felt the commitment of the community to start looking at that paving. There was a time, I'm sure you know, that not that long ago where people brought the asphalt in and covered over everything, and we had no say in it whatsoever. And that we've been sliding, so to speak. And I don't know if this is going to give Sully a bad dream some night, or but we've been moving toward encouraging people to come up with more textured surfaces than asphalt.
yeah, right. In other words, where brick sidewalks are part of the character of the neighborhood and the street, would it be fair to say you're encouraging something
Absolutely.
compatible? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So one of the questions that was raised at the council that I have is that currently we only require brick sidewalks in the historic district with a few exceptions. And the question that came up was, we have a changing city, and we have some areas that are kind of developing in a different nature, with the Islington Street corridor getting brick edging on Islington. And several of those streets in that area in particular are what is kind of raising questions and concerns, where there are existing brick, but it's no longer, they're not in the brick zone because they're not in the historic district, yet they live in historic homes. So the question is does it make sense to keep the policy the way it is, where it defines it just in the historic district, or should we be thinking about an altered policy that reflects areas outside the historic district if the homes are historic?
Wow, that's interesting. As a historic district commissioner, I can say that we live in the luxury world of not having to pay for any of the things that takes place. And so we have interests, I would say, for myself, that the idea of expanding the footprint, so to speak, the feel of the historic district is pretty much connected to the brick sidewalk. That's a unique thing that many people that come to our community have experienced, and they see that as a signature of our historic interest in our historic district, so to speak. Extending that beyond that into houses that are not inside of the district itself still provides a sense of continuity and unity. One of the things that makes the historic district work is the contribution that every property can make to it, and contributing to that is that sidewalk landscape.
Okay. That makes sense.
We used to have a historic District B.
is correct. That was, as I recall it, and I was actually involved during that time, Historic District B was largely demolition. I don't know that it was exclusively, but largely demolition. And so it was hard to have a policy about demolition other than don't, but that was about it. We harassed people, which is really what it was, because while we could review their plans to demolish, we could not review their plans to repair or reinstall. So I'm sure Sully remembers some of this, was someone would come in with a plan to take down a porch, but reinstall a porch of similar size and shape, and we would still have to grapple with, can we let them take it down? So the sidewalks at that stage in B never came into the conversation. Never, ever.
Right. No, I was more thinking of the fact that.
An extension of the district being a Class A district and a Class B
Right,
district.
there
Yes.
used to be a larger footprint,
Yes.
and
It's awkward. It's awkward. I'd love to sit down and try to map something like that out, but it's awkward.
yeah, I mean, I think in the case of the brick sidewalks,
It might be simpler.
there's just a few areas, Cabot, State, and streets like that, which aren't in the HDC anymore, aren't even in what used to be, well, I think they might be in what was B.
I don't remember the
Yeah.
defining features.
And we're hearing from residents that they'd like to keep their brick sidewalks. And I think that's, right now, if residents want to keep their brick sidewalk, they can appeal to DPW, and if they're willing to pay for them, and it's triple the cost of concrete, they can pay the difference, which is a little bit of flexibility that is working now. The question is, should we go further and say, always replace brick with brick, or allow this waiver system? And every street is different. You know, there are some streets where the sidewalks are in such rough shape that keeping brick may not be a good thing. There's others where, like Lower State Street, certain parts where it's really part of the character of the street. So, no easy answer that we've come up with yet. But any thoughts you have?
The only thing that I would think would be important, or one of the things I think would be important, would be to have the continuity, rather than someone on 403 having a brick sidewalk in front of their house, yet 401 and 405 do not. And that sort of spottiness, which I would think would also come back to haunt you in terms of maintenance costs and plowing situations and things like that, or everything's a little bit different on the brick than it is on the concrete. So I would be careful about that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the idea of someone being able to pay their way into their property standing out differently than the ones around it is a place that I'm not terribly comfortable going. I agree with the concept of people sharing the costs of doing something different for their community, but the idea of having something different for your particular property is kind of a little awkward.
Yeah, right. It's
I'm a working class guy, so I see awkward. I'm sure you understand.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's city infrastructure that we all pay for as taxpayers.
I think it's also important to note that everybody uses the sidewalks. It's not just the homeowner that lives in that space. So we have to be thinking about what would be best overall for city residents. And I think that's the challenge, is that, our cement sidewalks more navigable, and especially for accessibility reasons. Are they, I think we heard from our Director of Public Works saying that, they're easy to plow, the cement sidewalks, which makes sense, and that's why they've changed the structure of the brick ones so that they stay more level and don't sink over time. But I think there's also this question of, as the character of neighborhoods changes as well, what do we want the future of the city to look like? Especially in that, that space between Islington and Middle, that, the West End, how is that defined in ways that maybe when this original sidewalk policy was written, the neighborhood looked a little different. Maybe people weren't preserving their homes as much. So I guess that's.
I'm very sensitive on a personal level. I'm very sensitive to these kinds of hardscaping issues, although I'm a wood person. I recall not long ago there was before the current renovation work on Islington Street, we'll say about 12 years ago, I did a survey of Islington house by house, and I was struck by how many places had asphalt paving against their foundations, the sidewalk, the street in front of them, the sidewalk across the street to the foundation of the house across the street on the other side. And I always thought that was representative of a blight rather than a convenience. And I felt that the visual harm that was being done by that, my word, blight of asphalt, was something that could be rectified in large by just some curbing to separate things and some brick to create a sidewalk and buffer to the buildings so that everything didn't look like it was available for parking. So whether people are trying to restore their buildings or not, just making them look safe, presentable, and welcoming, regardless of the period that they were trying to project, is something that could be achieved by adjusting the way that you did your hardscaping. And that any design professional knows that we could put in an acre of this, or we could put some paths in, and which would be much more commodious. It's simple. Yeah.
Well, I have a question about some of the exceptions. And most noted, because I live on Aldrich Road, the historic district extends out to South Street and Middle Road. On the east side of Middle Street, that's brick. On the west side of Middle Street, that's pavement. It's not pavement, concrete. I guess I don't know why that decision was made, because it's all the historic district. And so I just have a question about why that decision was made. It wasn't ever brought before me when I was on the historic district to make that decision, so so I'm just wondering where that came from.
And that might be a question I don't know if our legal counsel knows.
Like I could say this, of course, it wouldn't have been a historic district commission decision.
No,
It's city
but
council-
be a
but it's city council
recommendation.
decision, and the city council has dealt with this issue a number of times over the years. So in all likelihood, it was one of those dealings that produced your time.
Okay.
But then, I guess, if the people of Middle Street wanted it, then would that fall under the having to pay for it thing? Or would it fall under being in the historic
If you
district?
can get enough people to say that they want it on a petition, does that make it part of the city's commitment to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And
I guess
a
it's-
block petition.
Yeah. If there was a counselor that sat on that block, there probably would be then, wouldn't it?
And this is what happened last year with State Street. We had a group of residents from the neighborhood who all came forward asking to keep their brick sidewalk, even though they weren't designated to have brick sidewalks. So that is what happened, and I think that's why we're here, because there's an idea that this might happen again, and question around equity and who has brick sidewalks and who doesn't, and making sure that it's fair and that it's well-defined, and there's good reasoning behind why we put them certain places and others not, I think is the concern.
But Richards Avenue was not in the historic district, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
And this is.
Yeah.
So it's just a question. I don't know if people want it there, but it just seems funny that the brick stops at Aldrich on one side, but then continues down on the other side.
How far in on Aldrich do you figure the historic district?
I'm sorry?
How far in to Aldrich is the historic district? Because
it's
I've
what-
been on the historic district for 22 years, and I never heard anything other than one property on the corner.
No, it actually extends to the second property because on Middle Street, it goes a distance.
And anyone inside that distance.
And on Islington Street, it goes the one property. So so on Middle Street, you get a number of properties that have even just a corner in the historic district, and then they have to comply. So my neighbor, who is the second house on Aldrich on the right, had to come before you
Just recently, yes.
just recently, because his part of his property is in the historic district.
Can I ask Councilor Lombardi, the sidewalk on Aldrich,
It's concrete.
is it concrete all the way to the corner?
Yeah.
Okay.
And because, I mean, that road is, for the most part, not in the historic district. It's
Right.
just, whatever the definition, I forget what it is, 100 feet, it's a distance rather than a property line.
Yeah. So this would be an example of, there are a few houses in the historic district, but they don't have brick sidewalks, which it actually doesn't, that isn't carved out in this policy. So technically, under this policy, they would or should, even though it's a whole street that doesn't generally. So, that's the other scenario. We probably have a few spaces like that within the city.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think all along Middle, you have a number of properties that are one house in, and they touch the district.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
I was just on Union Street, and it abruptly ends, the brick sidewalk from Middle heading on to Union, and it's really noticeable.
Okay.
Yeah. And those are the areas, in terms of the scope that we're talking about. And this is why I wanted to know how many blocks of brick would be subject to replacement by concrete in the future. Because I think the scope is really small. Union, Cabot, State Street we've dealt with. I don't know, north of Middle Street in that Ward 2 area, I think that's mostly concrete.
north of Middle?
Yeah, like between Middle and South.
Oh,
Yeah. It's mostly
Miller and
concrete at
Broad
this
Street,
point.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we're really just, when we're talking about existing brick, we're really just talking about sections between Middle and Islington in spaces, and it's not the whole sidewalk.
Right.
It's pieces of the sidewalk. So, and so that's the real, I guess, question.
If anybody's voting, I'm going to vote for the breadth of revitalization that you feel on the far end of State Street. It's the contribution that the city has made in the public ways has stimulated an awful lot of interest in the properties around there. And the place looks a lot more concise, and it looks a lot better.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I jump in? I know the conversation's largely about brick, but I would be remiss in my position here as a historian to miss the fact that there are, I know there are 3, I believe that there are 4 pieces of old stone
Yes.
flagged sidewalk in our community. And there's one currently on Fleet Street, near the fire station end of Fleet Street.
Washington Street.
That's yes, and there's one in Washington, one down at the end by the Blue Fin on Marcy Street.
Yeah, Marcy.
And there's a section on the Fleet Street where there's remains of a stone sidewalk, and it's a mess. And I'm sure, well-meaning city engineer would tear it up and put something else there. And it seems like we'd be missing an opportunity, because we don't have, unlike the brick that you're talking about, where your conversation is about a concise and connected plan, the stone sidewalks just pop up out of nowhere like a flash mob of stones. And this piece on Fleet is about to be lost. And no one honestly will miss it, other than it will be a piece of our history that we let slip through our fingers if we don't pay any attention to it whatsoever. I don't know if there are any other stone sections of sidewalk left, but the ones that we have, I would think, would be more precious than anything else.
May I ask David a question?
Yes.
Dave, this is your area of expertise. Do you think it's possible? I mean, I look at those pieces of sidewalk, they're beautiful, they're historic. People walked on them 300 years ago, but they don't look to me like they're ADA compliant, probably.
More than likely not.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible to save them?
You know, there was some work done. Yes, I believe that it's possible in some manner to save them. If you got on Washington Street, on the corner of Washington and Court, and there's a section on the right-hand side as you're heading toward my house. That area was taken up about 60 years ago, and the street widened before your time. And the stone sidewalk that was there was reconfigured, and some of the stones actually used to create a curbing, and it made it. I believe it works, but no, I don't believe that it's ADA compliant. I don't see how you can get to the end, the terminus of that, to make a ramp onto it. Seems like it'd be extremely difficult to do. It could be that the parts that you need to make it compliant could be made out of concrete as ramps, because we're really talking about the ramping, and allow the majority of the sidewalk to continue to exist. There's another one. Damn. Isn't there a section on Chapel Street in between
Yeah, I think
Daniel
there is.
and State?
Yeah, I think
There's a section there. I believe that was relayed at some point to a curb edge rather than a natural stone edge. And that one, to me, looks to be ADA compliant, but I've never actually done any measurements on it to be sure. Yeah, you get someplace. Maybe it's not legal to have them anymore, and you would probably be the best judge of that. But I would think that I would encourage you to find some place that you could put your finger on something that said we could keep them. Because there's just to me, that this is deep, but they're some of the most charming pieces of the history that this community has. I mean, when you think that George Washington actually walked on that sidewalk on Washington Street as he went down to see the Lears, you know, they're real things.
Right. Right. I know I live right by the section on Marcy Street, and it is not terribly easy to navigate on foot, and it definitely is not ADA compliant. Just I can't imagine a wheelchair getting through there, but there might be an option of creating an alternate route for those who need an ADA compliant path to get through there. I know that that's always an option, is, you know, an alternate route rather than taking that route down Marcy, because frankly, Marcy Street is not very easily navigable. in a wheelchair anyway because of the narrowness of the
And
sidewalk.
the slope.
Right, exactly.
Definitely not 1 foot down for 12 feet. It's
No.
it's steeper than that.
Definitely not, and it's easier probably to come all the way around Mechanic and around Pickering on the street, where there is no sidewalk, than it would be to try to come over Mercy Street, so, or come down Pleasant Street, which is now accessible with the widening and the new sidewalk. So there's probably an alternate path rather than changing that piece, because you're not going to fix that sidewalk on Marcy unless Marcy suddenly becomes a one-way street, because it is just too narrow.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I think that's almost the case in a few of these others. Fleet Street is the real question mark, I think, because we're coming up on a Fleet Street project soon. So, and I don't know what the planning is for that, so that will be worth finding out at least. Yeah.
Well, the current piece that still exists on Fleet Street of stone sidewalk wouldn't pass any test as it sits currently. So something needs to be done.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions before we let Mr. Adams go so that we don't keep him all morning?
Phone's been ringing off the hook. Thank you very much. Wish you all luck.
Thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate it. So we have a little bit more to think about here on sidewalks, and I was going to ask the committee first today, do you have anything else that you want to discuss on this today, or is this something that we want to think about and process and come back to at our next meeting with any suggestions? And also, is there anyone else you want me to invite in to speak to the committee?
I think just the information of how many blocks of sidewalk are left outside the historic district is, and what's the total scope that we're looking at?
Okay.
I could put that in a motion.
Okay. Is there anything else that we want to ask for before our next meeting, or?
Do you have a question, or do you want me to find out from Peter Rice more about the stone sidewalks and whether it's something that can be repurposed in the appropriate spaces or with some other attention,
Right.
to engineering detail? And if you want me to find out more about that, I can reach out.
Yes, that would be very helpful if we could find out what the plan is for Fleet Street, which is existing. I don't think there are currently plans to change these other spaces, but it would be nice to know what the DPW's policy is around them. Because that might be something that we want to reflect in this policy, this sidewalk policy from the council. And
I guess I'd want to know, I don't really know, I think the condition of the sidewalk on Middle Street, that is concrete, is in pretty good shape. But I guess I wonder if when that comes up for repaving or redo, whether that would be considered, could be considered for brick.
Okay. And I have another question on Middle Street as well. There was a discussion about a Middle Street redesign that I think got pushed back in the CIP budget. But when that comes forward, the idea was to have a multi-use path. What are the plans on multi-use path for paving material? Would it still remain brick, even because it's in the historic district? So,
Right. And if you need to have something that's not a hard curve, say for a raised bike lane, you probably can't do that with brick.
yeah,
Well, maybe you could.
maybe. So this is the kind of the question I have generally is, how is that going, how would that be addressed? in the planning stages.
So I'll get these questions to Public Works and
Okay, thank you, thank you. And our next meeting isn't for a month, he has a little bit of time. But I think that, ultimately, the questions that I'm going to be looking at, so everyone here knows over the next month, is I'm going to ask planning or what we anticipate coming forward in the master plan around neighborhoods and development, if there are going to be any significant changes, because I think that we have to constantly be thinking about the changes happening in the city and how that impacts this policy, because when this policy was written, we didn't have all the redevelopment that we're seeing in the West End. And so, and that has changed the way that we looked at Islington. But are there other areas we need to be thinking about as well? So,
Yeah, and I think we can assume continued upgrades in the neighborhoods and gentrification, and, that means that the brick sidewalks, where they add to character or where they're part of the history of the neighborhood, probably fit in with the upgrades. And would seem to be going backwards to go concrete.
yep. Yep. That's exactly my question and concern, is that in areas, as people move to protect historic properties more, we want to make sure that we're not, as a city, not progressing in the way that our residents are in doing so.
Right. I mean, I was approached by a resident who said, I've done a very exhaustive historic renovation of my property, and I'm about to lose my brick sidewalk. So, conversely, I think we all understand we have a certain amount of money and we have a lot of sidewalks in the city, and this is 3 times the cost of concrete. But it seems if we could find out the scope of what we're talking about, I think it's pretty finite.
Definitely reasonable. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to go back to our agenda so everyone knows what we're discussing next. The next item on the agenda is the Sustainability Blue Ribbon Committee Conversion Ordinance. The Sustainability Committee looked at the draft ordinance and responded to the questions the Governance Committee asked the last time we discussed this. And they came forward with some minor changes to their draft. They agreed that they needed to strike the language on appointment of a chair, since the Governance Committee has put forward language to the City Council already, including when a chair is appointed for committees in general. And then they changed the effective date to January 1st, 2024, so that it's clear that it's not going to take effect upon adoption of the Climate Action Plan. I think the goal was their committee is sunsetting at the end of December, and they want to make sure that the ordinance is adopted and people are reappointed for their new terms, so that there is no gap in their service. So that they are in place January 1st to keep working, I think was the goal. So that's why they changed that date. This is envisioning adoption of the ordinance well before the end of the year. They're hoping to have adoption sometime in October, so that there's time for reappointments, so that they're in place for January 1st. The difference between the two drafts you have is that, they added, first of all, to both a school board member, because they currently have a school board member, and they wanted to make sure they didn't exclude that person. And the first draft has instructions for the mayor to reappoint all members of the committee in staggered terms to create a healthy committee rotation, a third, and a third. Okay. The second draft you have, the alternate draft, moves the appointment question of staggered 3-year terms to the stagger coming after attrition. So the goal would then be for everyone on the committee, current committee to be reappointed and to 3-year terms. But as numbers fall off over the course of the 3 years and you get down to 9, which is the trigger in the language, the mayor would appoint people to staggered terms at that stage. So the staggering wouldn't occur until after the first 3-year term for everyone who's currently sitting on the committee. Now, that's with the assumption that some people are going to leave in that 3-year time frame anyway, so your numbers are going to decline in that time frame. But then at the same time, when you hit that 3-year time frame, if you haven't hit 9, everyone's term is going to expire, and the mayor at the time then will appoint people to staggered terms, a third, and a third of the committee. Really 3, 3, and 3 at that stage. So they haven't decided how they want to handle that. So they sent it back to us and asked the governance committee to look at this and see if the governance committee is happy with either or, and they want to make a final decision in September and then take it directly to the council from their committee. So it would go back to Councilor Denton, who initially brought this to the council from the Sustainability Committee, and then to the City Council. So I would love to hear from you all and see if you have any questions, concerns. And I should note that the reason they haven't settled this is they don't know how many members they have who want a 3-year term, who want a 2-year term, who want a 1-year term. So they're currently surveying their committee members to see if they already have enough that they could just create a healthy stagger and not have to wait. But they also don't want to kick anyone off the committee in a year if those individuals want to serve a longer term. So.
Did they express a preference of the 2 alternatives?
They did not. So that's where they couldn't make up their minds.
Right.
And I have to say, this is difficult in a committee setting because no one wants to say, oh, well, I get the 3-year term and you're going to get a 2-year term.
Right.
Especially when you're at a committee that's close to 18. We're not really sure the actual number of the committee. And I have to say the reason we're not clear is there are a lot of people on the books who haven't shown up in a while. So they need to reach out, and if those individuals don't reply, we're going to assume they're not part of the existing committee. But they have to reduce their numbers significantly to be in compliance with the new ordinance over the course of the next few years. So they don't want to presuppose who's going to rotate off the committee, because those individuals who rotate off in the first year will not be able to be reappointed immediately because their numbers will not have dropped down to 9. So that's the concern, is you'll lose, if you do a stagger, say you have 18, a stagger of 6, 6, and 6, that first year, the first 6 rotate off, they can't be reappointed. So you're not reappointing anyone until after the second year, because you won't hit that 9 figure until the second year. So they might.
Or gradual.
Yes, so they might solve their whole problem if they do the survey and find out that they have enough members that are willing to only serve a year or 2 years. But that's why they're asking us to look at both, because they don't want to delay it any longer. They want to get it to the council in September.
It seems to me that they have to get their survey done before we can really, I mean, either way works as far as I'm concerned. And so
Right. I think that's the signal they're asking for.
Yeah.
Is the governance committee comfortable with either direction, so that they can go ahead and move forward?
And I guess and if the survey doesn't tell us anything, then where are we at?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some value to the more gradual approach because that way you keep as many of the existing people as possible. But I think if you want it to be a permanent committee, both of these alternatives get us there. It's just a question of how quickly.
Right. And I agree with that, but I guess I'm hopeful that their own people can understand the problem and take care of it. I guess that's my, I don't want to, I feel funny imposing on that.
Right. That's I'm in a very similar position, and I sit on the committee as one of their council reps, and I think that's it's really their call as to what they're comfortable with, and they're a very inclusive committee. The culture is incredibly inclusive, and so I think they just don't want to exclude anyone, especially anyone who's been working very hard to get a climate action plan in place, because this committee has been doing a lot of work with public forums, and they want to make sure that those individuals are included if they want to be included in that implementation process for the first few years. So I think that's the concern, is if somebody's put in a lot of work getting to a certain stage just to implement something, they don't want to tell them, I'm sorry, you're gonna rotate off in a year. But they might solve their own problem by doing the survey, and then it becomes a moot point. But as long as the governance committee is fine with either instructions, then we can give the signal to sustainability that they can move forward and make the decision on their own.
And if we went with the non-gradual alternative, correct me if I'm wrong, wouldn't the mayor have to make some one-year appointments? He'd make one-year appointments, he, she, 2-year appointments, 3-year appointments.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm a little nervous about drafting a climate action plan and at the same time in January saying, well, we want you to help with this, but it's just a one-year appointment. I think there's some continuity there that the more gradual approach might help us. You've had people who helped give birth to the climate action plan. Maybe it's good to keep them around for a while to see it through.
I think that is the concern. I will say that there are a lot of newer members on the committee in the last year, because there are a lot of people who joined to get actively involved in the climate action planning process. So they haven't served very long. Whereas there are some members that have been there for a very, very long time. But they also serve to guide the whole committee. So that's the other challenge, is not wanting to lose those individuals.
Right.
If everyone is comfortable with me going back to them and sharing thoughts that I've heard here, end of September, I will gladly do that. And are we comfortable with a motion to move this back to sustainability for them to make the final decision in September, and then they can move it to the council? I mean, in August, they're making a decision end of August, sorry.
Yeah. I guess, do we need a motion to send it back to them, or are we going to say now yes to I just, I'm not sure if we need a motion to do that, I guess.
The only reason I was asking for a motion is that the council referred this to us, and I want to make sure that there's a clean, traceable path for how it came. Well, it came from sustainability to the council, and the council referred it to governance. And I want to make sure that the council is clear that then governance sent it back to sustainability to make the final decision and send it forward, rather than it coming back to governance and through us again.
And I guess my question is, again, if they can't get a resolution out of their survey. then-
Right. I think that what happens if they don't have a resolution out of their survey, then they will adopt the alternate, the language that allows for appointment after 3 years, creating the stagger after 3 years. That's what happens. So if they have, 16 of 18 members come back and say, I want to serve 3 years, they're going to choose the language that allows them to serve 3 years first, knowing that some of those people will change their mind. But that's what they'll do, and have the stagger adjusted at the end of that first 3-year term.
So maybe we should make a motion then that accommodates that language, that says, depending on their survey, if the survey proves to choose the first option, then that's good. If it is still undecided, then that's a choice of the second option. Is that, do you understand what I'm saying? So that way it keeps it moving,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Can I ask our legal counsel for the best language to use there, so that we make sure that that's really clear?
I think I understand
Okay,
what's happening.
okay, okay.
I mean, basically, I'm saying a non-decision from them is a decision for the second option.
Correct,
Right.
correct,
Yeah,
right.
Okay.
All right. So, let me-
that's the motion.
okay. So a motion to allow them to move forward, correct? With the first option, unless their survey is inconclusive. Is that,
I think it was, unless their survey shows that,
survey, yeah. Go ahead, shows that they are undecided, and then,
We'll decide for them.
yeah, the second option,
yeah.
Yeah.
or the alternate option, will be presented to the council.
If you read that back,
Okay.
I'll agree with it.
Move to allow them to move forward with the option, with the first option, unless their survey, okay, let's see if I can read this, survey, I don't know what that word is, shows that they are undecided, and then the alternate option will be presented to the council.
Maybe if we say the survey contradicts that.
Okay, unless the survey,
Yeah.
contradicts.
The first option, yeah.
Fix that. Okay. Move to allow them to move forward with the first option unless their survey contradicts that, and then the alternate option will be presented to the council.
I mean, is
Yeah,
that your
that's
intent?
good.
Is that good? Okay,
So moved.
So I'll second, yeah.
all right. Any other discussion? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So that will go back to sustainability. The next item is election disclosures, Administrative Ordinance 1902, and City Charter Section 3.8. We were working on this at our last Governance Committee meeting, and we asked our legal counsel to come back to us with some language. Today, we have some draft language to look at, and I'm pulling that up now. For everyone at home, this is draft language, so we just received this back. It is not included in your packet. This is the first time we are reviewing it.
Okay.
So we won't be making a final decision today. It would come back in the packet for a final decision after we discuss that
I was
language.
wondering.
Yes,
where
yes.
it was.
Yes. So, Section 1902, last week, we discussed making sure that in-kind contributions are included in election disclosures. And again, this is for the 2025 election because it will not be in place in time for this election. So, Section C, the added language, all such contributions in excess of $100 shall be reported, whether the contribution is made in money, materials, or services. Contributions from sources unknown to the candidate shall be reported as such. How does everyone feel about this language?
I think that's what we talked
Yeah,
about.
that's what that was our intent.
Okay?
So bring it back.
Okay, so we're comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Section F is where we have additional language as well under violations. And we specifically talked in Section F about concerns around violations for those who are running a political action committee or those who are unelected, because that was not terribly clear in our ethics ordinance of how that would be dealt with. And so the additional language there is, in addition to any penalties available under the Code of Ethics, any violation of the mandatory disclosure ordinance may be reported by the Board of Ethics to the Office of the New Hampshire Attorney General. So that would be the recourse for specifically, I mean, it could be the recourse for anyone, but specifically for those who are not in elected office, because the ethics ordinance envisions individuals who are elected. How does everyone feel about that?
I think that's what we discussed as well.
Okay. Everyone's comfortable with that language as well? Okay. All right, and finally, Section 8. These were some of the final changes we discussed. We added behind the phrase, all election financial disclosures shall be public records, we added the phrase, and shall be published on the city website. Okay? Everyone's comfortable with that as well?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Are there any other concerns around Section 1902? Anything else we need to look at here before we come back in September? Because when we come back at our September meeting, this will be final language to be adopted by the committee to move forward to the council. Is there anything else? Okay. If there's nothing, then I will gladly put this in the packet for September, and it will come back in its final form for us to adopt at that meeting. That way, today, we will hear public comment on this before we make that adoption in September. Okay? So let's go back to our agenda then for today. We also have a city council preliminary draft ethics policy. And again, this was a draft version that just came to the governance committee. And this is the first time we're looking at it today. And we can go over that as well. Pulling it up here. These are questions we had been discussing for the last several months that have arisen, but that we didn't think rose to the level of including in the conflict of interest section in the ethics ordinance. But yet, were issues of conflict that should be raised and discussed at the council level and possibly should be put in policy. So for those at home watching, we should note that there are 3 issues really that are addressed. The first is council members exerting undue influence on quasi-judicial board members. The second is a concern around attending other counselors' meetings when you could potentially create a quorum without noticing the other counselor, and making sure that notice takes place so we do not accidentally create quorum in committees. And the third, voting on matters pertaining to your own personal reputational interest, including the issues of ethics and conflict of interest. That's the third. So, was there anything else that that is not included in the ethics ordinance that we need to be mindful of here to include in a policy for the council?
I actually sat down and tried to work on a couple of areas. One would be where there's not a direct personal or pecuniary interest, but there's an appearance of conflict. Some language that the counselor should ask for a vote from the rest of the council on whether the rest of the council feels there's enough of appearance of a conflict that that counselor should recuse. I can give that to the deputy city manager to circulate if you want to consider that. I thought a little bit about non-public session and a disclosure from non-public sessions, and I think there's competing interests there. We have state statutes saying non-public shouldn't be disclosed unless the minutes are unsealed by a vote. But we have had in the histories of the city a number of occasions where councilors felt they needed to blow the whistle on decisions that were made behind closed doors. I can think of lawsuit settlements and things like that. So I couldn't, I left that one. It's too thorny. But it's an interesting area of we don't have a whistleblower law per se, but do we want that part of the council's conflict of interest policy and ethics policy? I don't know.
Yes, Councilor.
Mr. Chair, please, it occurs to me that the people watching this at home might benefit from a 30-second presentation of the difference between an ordinance and a policy.
Yes, I think everyone would appreciate that. So,
An ordinance such as the Code of Ethics that the committee was dealing with 5 minutes ago, an ordinance is the law of the city. And once it's adopted by the city council, everyone is obligated to follow it, and there are in fact penalties associated with not complying with that law of the city. What the committee is talking about now is a council policy. Council policy has not become the law of the city. There are no penalties associated with not complying with a council policy. What a council policy is a statement by the council in which it, as a matter of collegiality, is agreeing amongst itself how it is going to conduct its business. There are no penalty associated with it. There are no legal ramifications. This is the council trying to work together to do things in an orderly, business-like, and ethical manner.
Thank you so much for providing the clarification. I think that that's really important. I know I have concerns around, being very careful that we don't put counselors in a position that they're the judge and jury deciding on another counselor's behavior. That's why we have an ethics policy, and that's why we have it set up the way we do, where we have a separate ethics board that makes those decisions and moves it back to the council with guidance for the council. And so it's helpful sometimes to have policies in place so it's clear for counselors what's kind of out of bounds, so that other counselors aren't being asked to police one another, because it's really not your role is to police others. And I think that that's why we are working on a council policy, so that everyone understands this is kind of the behaviors that we would anticipate seeing on the council. This is one of those areas where I think it might be helpful to add 1.4 and 1.5. First, I'd ask legal counsel to look at Counselor Tabor's question around appearance of conflict. I know I personally have an issue that I have recused on twice at council, where there's an appearance of a conflict when there's actually no direct conflict. I recuse every time the lease comes up on the South End Meeting House, because I'm on the board of the Friends of South End, and they're named in the lease as an organization that has the right to use the conference room. But in practice, they have never once used the conference room, and they have no relationship with the organization that leases that space. So there's really absolutely no conflict, and there would be no monetary benefit to doing so, because it's a neighborhood association that usually meets in people's houses. So, but I always recuse, because I'm concerned about the appearance of conflict when there is none there. And so I think there are questions around that. I think that maybe just some language around appropriate reasons to recuse might be helpful here as well. You'd anticipate that counselors would recuse when they have a direct interest in an organization that's coming before the council, even though it's not a financial interest.
It could be a fiduciary interest as a board member.
Exactly. And that's not truly clear in our conflict of interest rules. And so it might be nice to have that be a little bit more explicit here in the council policy. What is appropriate time for recusal from decisions of the council? And I think the legal department would have more insight into that over a number of years of dealing with this.
One of the things that John suggested, or that he was thinking about, was a council vote. And my problem with that is that, suppose a member said, okay, is this a conflict of interest, and puts it to the council for a vote. They vote, say, no, it's not. And then an ethics violation is filed, and the ethics board and ombudsman, it's not an I forget what we call them now, but determines that it was an ethics violation. It makes it a very confusing thing.
Yeah. And there are real challenges here around that.
Yeah.
But I think
It's up to the individual, I guess is what I'm saying. It's not up to the council to police the individual councilors.
However, to find an ethics violation, we'd have to go back to the actual ordinance. And so I think that the question is, regarding something that's outside of the scope of the ordinance, not a direct pecuniary interest, for example. But your point's well taken. The council could get it wrong,
Yeah.
And the individual could get it wrong.
and the individual could get it wrong.
Exactly. So maybe this is where it might be helpful to have some guidance here on recusal. What would be the general legal guidance on best time to recuse? And not just around conflict, but appearance of conflict, I think is the question I have as well, because Councilor Tabor raised that.
The committee wishes sometime between now and your next meeting, I'll meet with Councilor Tabor and we'll come up with something.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions about the existing language that's here? 1.1, 1.2, 1.3? I mean, these were 3 items that we identified that are clear, questions of conflict.
So 1.2, help me just with a clarification. They're not to attend other councilors' committee meetings. Only if their attendance might create a quorum?
Let me say this. That's written the way it is because it is verbatim what the committee had suggested.
Yeah.
I actually don't know what it means.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, I do. I think that is what it means. So you have a few committees that are really close in number. This is a good example, the governance committee. 2 more members attend this meeting, and you've created an inadvertent quorum of the council. So when you have committees that have 3 counselors on them, this one, land use, legislative subcommittee has 4, right? So 1 other member can create a quorum of the council. You should really be mindful that you check in with the counselor that is on that committee to make sure that there isn't somebody else that's invited to attend, to speak. A great example is when this committee invited Councilor Denton to speak on his proposed charter changes. If we'd had another counselor attending that discussion, we would have inadvertently created a quorum and we wouldn't have given notice. And that would put us in a difficult position of having not put a notice out of potential quorum. So you don't want to get other counselors inadvertently in trouble by showing up at their committees. And so it's a courtesy to check in and say, hey, I want to make sure I'm planning to attend your meeting, and I want to make sure that I'm not going to create a quorum.
I just want to just simplify it to say councilors should avoid creating an inadvertent quorum at non-council meetings.
Right.
Wouldn't that kind of do it?
I think Counselor Cook was just looking for a little bit more in terms of check in with the chair, unless you're an invited guest,
Yes.
in order to avoid any surprises or a potential quorum issue.
Right.
So I think it's just a slight rework of what you've got there would make it clearer.
Okay.
Bob and I can work on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
And that includes Zoom?
Well, if somebody's on Zoom and they're planning to participate, yes, it includes Zoom.
Or if they're just watching?
Well, this is the challenge.
Yeah.
The question is, you can also just watch after the meeting.
Yeah.
So once you join via Zoom, like a public member, you're in attendance at the meeting. And you're privy to the discussion, especially if you participate in public comment. So that's the concern.
So maybe that just should be noted.
Yeah. Is that reasonable?
Got the idea, and we can definitely produce something else for you for the next meeting.
Okay.
And just for Bob's drafting efforts, am I correct when Bob sits down with Counselor Tabor to work on these potential 2 other provisions? What I heard is, I think, and this is why I'm asking, is that while you may be looking at drafting some language that says city councilors should not vote when they, say, hold a fiduciary position on a board in which that subject matter appears, you're gonna almost end it right there, period, and not have a vote of the council about whether that was appropriate. You don't want to be in that monitoring position. You just want to get everyone's buy-in at the time the policy is adopted at the beginning of the council year.
I would say we didn't have a consensus to have that voting process.
I just figured it would help if we kind of just nail, kind of see where we really land on that. Okay.
Yes.
But I
yes.
think it was a little broader of
Right.
the,
We can,
when should a counselor recuse themselves beyond direct pecuniary interest?
right,
Right.
right, which is why I was grabbing, you sit in a fiduciary
Right.
position on a
Right.
Right.
board or organization.
Exactly. And there are also some other questions, I think, around that, too. Say it's not, something's coming up that's not, and this is why we put the family provisions
Right.
in it. It's your parents' property that's impacted by a project, or your, should you be recusing yourself? And, we've defined family, but there is no direct pecuniary interest there, so you really don't have to.
Right.
But it really does create the appearance of conflict if you're arguing about a project that says across the street from your parents' home. So, or your child's home. This is I think, important to remember.
There's one other that, this goes back the previous decade, and I'll just try this out on both of you to see what you think, but there used to be a practice of non-meetings. Which
Yes, I
were,
remember that.
which was well, Bob, maybe you can explain it, but
Non-meeting was a term that was used to describe what we are now calling a meeting with council and voting plan. Because the definition of the term meeting under state law specifically excludes meetings with council, therefore the right to know law does not apply to those. The term non-meeting got invented, I think actually we invented it, and to describe situations in which a quorum of the council would be together in one place to meet with council. But because that's an exclusion from the right to know law, there would be no notice given, no minutes kept, et cetera.
So I have a
And we
question.
just stopped doing it because public was concerned about it.
well, exactly, and
Right.
and there were occasions when decisions of the council were made, non-noticed, non-public,
Non-meeting.
non-meeting. And so, do we want some kind of policy statement that we discourage that?
Right. Because now the council, when meeting with its legal counsel, meets in non-public, but it's still a meeting of the council.
There are
It's just in
alternate ways to
non-public.
accomplish the same thing.
Yes.
A non-meeting was quicker and easier, didn't call for any advance notice, didn't have to have 24 hours, 2 public places, didn't have to keep minutes. There are a lot of reasons why a non-meeting was just simple and easy to do. However,
For
public
the
became
participants,
concerned.
but for the public.
So the public became concerned,
Yeah.
issues raised, and the council made a decision, we just won't have non-meetings anymore. Instead, we will follow the right to know law process of going into a non-public session for a meeting with council.
Okay.
Right. And
And that's the way it's been for quite some time.
which is,
So non-meetings are not really a thing I mean, there's nothing, no definition of a non-meeting.
There are not, the right to know law, state right to know law defines a meeting. Basically, there's a quorum of, say, the city council to conduct city council business. But within that definition, there are some specific exclusions. One would be to discuss collective bargaining. Another would be for a meeting with counsel, the legal counsel. Therefore, for those purposes, an assembly of the council is not a meeting, as defined by the right to know law, and one does not have to comply with right to know law technicalities and proceedings. But, as noted, the council was doing that fairly frequently at one time. Public became disenchanted with the process, and the council made the determination as a policy, I might add, simply not to do that anymore, rather to go through the more elaborate right to know law process.
And my point is that there's no defined terminology in anything that is a non-meeting, is what I'm saying.
Right, non-meeting is not a term found at law anyplace. It
Yeah.
was something that we just started to call those things.
Yeah, okay, good.
So the city of Portsmouth has gone above and beyond and not done that, and just has non-public meetings
For quite
that
some time.
are
Yeah.
noticed and minutes are kept.
Right, those non-meetings are perfectly legal, and they could be done now. However, it's just not.
Right, so as policy, I think we're on a better policy track now than when we had non-meetings, and maybe, and I don't think the council should go back to that. I mean, that's my own feeling.
No, I don't think so either. It's just that you're defining something that doesn't exist, I guess, is in legal terminology.
Right.
So
It's,
it was,
Well, as I say, I think we invented the term.
Yeah.
Since it wasn't a meeting under the right to know law, it was a non-meeting. That's really where it came from.
yeah.
Right.
I mean, I'm kind of a purist about it. Like, I don't think that the council should vote in non-public. I think they should debate and vote in public. If they want to get background or interview somebody in a legal matter, that's the purpose of that non-public part of RSA 91A. But
It is lawful for the council to vote in non-public session. That vote needs to be reflected in the minutes, and unless the minutes are sealed, that vote becomes public more or less immediately. But
I
But
don't
I
think
rec-
we've done that, have we?
it has been done. Our recommendation, for the reasons that Councilor Tabor's saying, is why bother? Just come out into public session and vote in public.
Right.
well, I think the public has a right to see that
It needs to
deliberation.
be kept sealed.
I think there might be occasions where if one were contemplating bringing a legal action in which you might have wanted to make some formal vote, you might want to have that remain at least for a period of time until the action is actually brought, to keep it in a executive session, in a non-public session, and the minutes sealed. There are sometimes reasons from a litigation posture
Right.
that you may not want to immediately disclose the next step being taken in some part of negotiation, but the city manager might want, say, a concurrence from the city council.
Right.
Just kind of putting it out there. I think that's why a little bit of flexibility is useful. I think we're all comfortable with as much notice and as much openness as possible, but there certainly are times where you might actually not want to have the, kind of open disclosure right away because of the posture of either litigation or the negotiation. So that's all.
I can see an instance, even with our conflict of interest policy and our ethics code, that if someone were found in violation and the violation were egregious enough that the council was considering a referral to the court, that the council would want to meet with legal counsel in non-public session and probably vote there because you wouldn't want to impugn anyone's character further around whether or not you were going to file a suit against them in court for a violation, especially if you ultimately decided not to. You would not want that consideration public because it could impugn someone's character further. I think that there's probably some concern around that.
Unless all of the information is already in the public's
Right.
realm. I mean, if it's a debate about the next action, but all of the information is already public. I guess where I'm going is, do we need any policy stating doing business in public is the rebuttable presumption, and discouraging votes in non-public, discouraging decisions in non-public, where the public doesn't get to see the deliberation around it?
Well, not only a rebuttable presumption that business will be done in public, it is clearly the law of the state with very narrow exceptions.
Right.
It might be worthwhile to add that.
There's always ways that a governing body, there's always the temptation to say, let's talk about this in private. And let's not do this in the glare. But we can. And it takes discipline, and do we need any policy around that?
Yeah. It's not unreasonable to add some phrasing and language for the committee to look at.
Just to summarize to the moment, what the committee has decided today in terms of work product from the city legal department for the next meeting of the committee are 3 changes or proposed amendments to the conflict of interest policy alone at the city council, and they are number 1, the issue brought up by Councilor Tabor about avoiding the appearance of impropriety, even where there may not be an actual impropriety. Number 2, to avoid the councilors creating an inadvertent quorum at non-council meetings by showing up unannounced, and therefore the council policy would be a councilor proposing to attend a non-council meeting of another councilor would notify that person so they can determine what to do. And number 3, we will create a policy which presumes that all council business will be conducted in public. And
To the full extent of the law.
yeah, and those are the 3 things thus far.
Okay. Is there anything else on this today? Okay. All right, then we will come back to this with additional language from the legal department in September at our next meeting. We have already covered the sidewalk policy, so we are now on to public comment. Does anyone want to come forward with public comment? Please, join us.
Thank you. Good morning. Peter Huda, 280 South Street. I want to take you back to the first discussion on the brick sidewalks. So this brings to mind a couple of questions that I have, since this is also a current topic being discussed for a rather large project that is going on downtown. So the first question that came up on sidewalks in various other areas, notably on Marcy Street, was, is this sidewalk ADA compliant? So I would ask, for my own information, what is ADA compliant? I don't know if you know that off the top of your head, Bob, but I've done a little bit of research on that, and it seems there's a little bit of conflict there. The next question I would ask, and this is from kind of the presentation that was given to us last Tuesday, plus what was said today, is I would think that since we are a 400-year-old city, that if we don't have ADA-compliant sidewalks in the rest of town, that they would be grandfathered in. And is that a correct assumption? So there's still a lot of questions in my mind around this, and I think your proposal was great to find out, what are we actually dealing here? Is this really a material issue? The other thing I would ask you to think about, and I think Councilor Tabor also touched on this, is housing, the housing location, because as a person who lives in the historic district, I am limited and I am under the rules of the HDC. So any person, even over on Middle or wherever they have to keep their house or all of their property up to HDC listings. So I guess, are we doing a two-pronged thing here, saying, oh, but the city doesn't? If you have brick sidewalks and you're in the historic district or you're on the edge, we're actually going to ask these people to pay for them. So you're required to keep your house like that, but the city is not required to keep the sidewalks comparable. So that would be another thing to think about. The other question I do have is I'm struggling with the ability in this policy for a DPW staff member to make a decision on whether somebody could or should have either brick sidewalks or non-brick sidewalks. First of all, it's an expenditure to the city if they decide to do that. Oh, and on that one, my question would be, it keeps coming up that to put brick sidewalks in, it costs 3 times what it does for cement ones. So based on the new stormwater policy that's going to come in, I guess I would ask for an updated cost on this, because what we really need now is to make sure we have more porous underneath, because I do believe, as Mr. Rice explained to us, that we pave the bottom and then we put some kind of grout or sand in there, and then we put the bricks on. So doesn't the city have to follow the same thing that the rest of us have to as residents, using more porous material and more environmentally friendly materials? That would be another question on that. The next thing I would like to ask you to consider on the Sustainability Committee, number B, under powers and duties. On the first one, you're saying implementation of a climate action plan. This is a committee and they can't implement. So maybe a word change, develop and recommend, present, something, but I think you're asking them to do something that they can't do. This is obviously going to be done by the city staff. So that would be just a question there. The last thing would be on your conflict of interest and all the discussions on that, and on some of your election stuff. The other thing I'd like to call your attention to, as you go through 1901, and I guess I don't have the latest information here, but on municipal officials, the state made some changes, I think in 2021, taking it up from $100 for an individual to $200. So I don't know if you can actually enforce the $100 limit on that. The next thing I'd like you to think about on your conflict of interest, and I wasn't prepared for this and I could barely see it, so I'm looking at number 21, I guess, on your policy, and 11, 12, and 13. So this will probably be for Bob, but putting in something that a person that's on a council cannot, a council or a quasi-judicial board cannot attend other meetings without calling somebody. First of all, are you taking away this person's right as a resident, individual, and taxpayer? Are you taking away their First Amendment right on here? And Are you saying that this precludes any city council member or any member of a quasi-judicial board, which we know we have, 3 or 4, from even attending another meeting without some kind of announcement? So I would ask you to think about that and think about the legal ramifications of that. The last comment I guess I would have, since it was pounded into my head for 2 years, is be careful on your meetings and your non-meetings under 91A. And the other thing that Bob did discuss is you can meet under 91A for legal counsel, but what 91A does say specifically is you don't have to tell what you're going to talk about, but you should put a subject in there. And I know the prior council was held to that, and I'm not seeing it currently. So hope that helps. Just some comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Please come forward.
Good morning. Thank you, Zelita Morgan. I have a quick question on Sustainability Committee and other committees in general, because we do have staff usually being part of these committees. Are the roles and responsibilities or expectations of the staff engaging with this committees clear, or is that going to be made clear? Or I think it would be good, both for the chair of these committees and also for the staff joining, knowing what the expectation is in terms of what is the outcome, how is the staff facilitating, and what's opening, just to give clarity on how those dynamics are in place, and a consistency from a board to committee to committee. Right. And here's a suggestion, is that this governance committee looks into visibility to the public and consistency on actions passed by the council to the administration. So there should be a format, a consistent report out, like a way of following up. Do you have a system right now where you know an action that you've given to the city administration, where it stands and how it is progressing? I think this is what I'm talking about. This has happened, in the past, like when I was in the council, for instance, each manager has a way of doing so. Bohenko would not leave the meeting without telling, okay, I'm getting back to the council on this on such and such a date. But as the city grows and as there are many and multiple activities ongoing and actions, I think it works very well for everyone, all the stakeholders, from staff to council to residents, to really have an easy and a visual of, okay, these are the actions, this is where we stand, to have publish, or it could even be on the website, for that matter, if something that makes sense, right? It's like of a public outreach or whatever the case might be. But I think from a matter of at least between city council and city management and the public, that there is a consistent visibility to all the actions that are being passed from city council to city administration, and a report out with valuable feedback on where those actions stand. This is a suggestion, but I think it's valuable. There have been cases already where things have, stuff happens and it just falls out of the radar screen. But it is important to keep on track. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else in the room and no one on Zoom, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. Announcements for the committee. The next meeting is September 11th. I hope everyone received the schedule. If not, that schedule will be coming to you from legal in the next day for the rest of the year. in case anyone doesn't know the schedule. That meeting on September 11th, I should note, because of ceremonies here at City Hall, we might have to adjust the time slightly on that meeting depending upon the planning around those ceremonies. The ceremonies might end on time, they might not, but just a heads up to those at home too who are watching, if we're delayed on the September 11th, it's due to ceremonies taking place. We anticipate talking about Section 1901, which we haven't talked about, continuing the discussion around the draft ethics policy. I should note that 1902, the final version, is coming back to the Governance Committee for approval. We will continue our discussion of the sidewalk policy, and then we have some blue ribbon committees that we still haven't discussed. Hopefully you'll have some status back from African Burying Ground Stewardship Committee. The Energy Advisory Committee, I guess, has to think a little bit about this as well. Citywide Neighborhood Committee, and the Sister Cities Blue Ribbon Committee. Those are the ones that I have still on my list. And is there anything else that anyone wants to make sure is flagged for announcements? Yeah. If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, we are adjourned. Thank